Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Quebec 2022 election CUTV livestream, co-presented with our pals at the Solidarity Journalism Co-op, Pivot. I'm your host, Maya Amoah, coming to you live from Concordia's Community University television station in downtown Montreal. Founded in 1969, CUTV is Canada's oldest campus-based TV facility, supporting a wide variety of independent productions and serving Concordia students and the surrounding community. We are a hub for independent media production and growing media institutions with initiatives including our Grassroots Coverage Fund and our bi-weekly news video show, Local 514. Tonight, we're partnering with Pivot with interviews that will feature the kinds of observations and analysis you won't find anywhere else in mainstream corporate media. Watch for conversations with the Rovers' Chris Curtis and author Nora Loreto, and Pivot's Sam Harper, Coralie Beaumont, Alexis Rose, Gabrielle Brassard-Lecourt on this broadcast between now and 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But first, we have our first guest that will be coming to us shortly. His name is Taylor C. Noakes. He's an independent journalist and public historian, and his work has appeared in Jacobin, Canadian Dimension, the Toronto Star, the CBC, and he writes a regular column for Cult Montreal. He was also once on a reality TV show called Canada's Next Great Prime Minister, and he didn't win. Welcome, Taylor.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. Just give me a moment. Okay. So I'm going to just get everything connected together properly. There's been a bit of that. It's a little slow on here. You know what? I'm going to actually just read it from my laptop. Just give me a moment, Taylor, okay? We're just getting everything connected.
All good.
All good?
Yep.
Okay. So let's start from the beginning with you. So you comment frequently on Quebec politics and have a background as a historian. What's the big picture takeaway from this election?
That's a great question. First, I think the most important takeaway is that the CAQ doesn't actually have to accomplish much in order to get reelected, and it's looking like it's going to be another majority government, which is a little bit rare, especially over the course of the last 30 years. So I think the last time this happened was with Premier Bourassa, and that goes back. It goes back 30 years. I personally think his handling of the pandemic was abysmal. Obviously, the crisis in the long-term care facilities, which he refuses to have any sort of independent inquiry into. This has been a very negative campaign. So the fact that he can run a negative campaign, not have much to show for his performance in terms of the pandemic, I think he hasn't shown much for what he's done, and he's going to be reelected for it. So that's not great. It'll be interesting to see how Quebecers respond to a fairly negative campaign. Quebecers historically vote more, like the voter participation rates tend to be a lot higher than in other provinces, and certainly at the federal level. And I mean, often by like a considerable amount. So if it'll be interesting to see whether that translates this time around, whether that high participation rate is maintained or whether it decreases. It has decreased, I think, over the course of the last two elections. And so it'll be interesting to see if the participation rate with this year's Quebec election is similar to, let's say, this year's Ontario election, which was also abysmally poor.
Right. And, writing at Cult Montreal, you argue that once again, Quebec, like most other Canadian provinces, they, in almost every federal election, it's like having a Seinfeld election. That's one about nothing. Your takeaway is that there's a good reason to be disappointed in just about every party this year. Tell me, how are you feeling about tonight?
Not great. Because I'm Quebecois, and I want Quebec to succeed. I want Canada to succeed. I want it to be a better place tomorrow than it was yesterday. Let's not kid ourselves. Right now, the most important election happening in the world is probably in Brazil. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens there. So it's not the most significant of elections, but, I gotta say, it probably really sucks to be a visible minority in Quebec right now. And we've seen a lot of, quote unquote, people with quote unquote leadership skills saying awful things about immigrants and about visible minorities and cultural minorities, all kinds of minorities in Quebec. And it makes it a very unwelcoming place. And like the consequence of that is probably going to be, there's going to be another sustained period of brain drain in Quebec. And I don't think Quebec can afford that. It needs diversity. It needs people from other walks of life. It's already a fairly culturally homogenous place, one of the most in North America. In fact, Quebec is so culturally homogenous and genetically distinct or unified, I should say, that it's actually used for medical testing when companies come up with vaccines or anything that has to do with gene pools. They study Quebec because it's a fairly homogenous gene pool. So we could definitely use some more diversity. And this election was not about diversity. It was about American-styled rhetoric about putting up walls and immigrants being, spreading the English language like a virus. It was really unfortunate. It's shameful, to be totally honest.
Right, it really is. And let's talk about some of these players in this election more specifically. We have Francois Legault, a right-wing, old-school Quebecois populist, a paternalist with a premier that knows best and don't ask any questions style of governing, in power since 2018, nominally federalist, but a former member of the Parti Québécois, a cabinet minister in governments of Bernard Landry, Lucien Bouchard in the late 90s and early 2000s. It's Papa Legault's province, and we're just living in it. Isn't that right?
It certainly can feel that way. Montreal's a bit of a bubble. Montreal's a bit of a bubble in a lot of different respects. So we can kind of continue living our normal lives as though, it's not going to make that much of a difference for some Montrealers. For other Montrealers, is going to make an unfortunate difference, especially if Legault continues on the warpath that he's been on. It's we don't need this return to a very paternalist top-down kind of governance. When we threw off the shackles of that style of governance during the Quiet Revolution, that was a triumph. It was a phenomenal moment in Canadian Quebec history to be able to get rid of an entire mentality that went with the kind of people that we elected. And now it feels like we're slipping right back into that. And so there's I guess, the pessimist sort of perspective on this is, we're doomed. This is not the right time to have such a retrograde to traditionalist kind of person. Francois Legault does not have a fantastic environmental record. He's got no vision on some of the more pressing social issues going on right now. And that's problematic. The optimist perspective is that it usually takes re-electing people like that a few times over before social forces galvanize to unseat people like that. It's unfortunate to have to go through a Duplessis to get to the Quiet Revolution, and I hope we don't have to do that again. But that does happen in Quebec society in particular. It's happened to previous long-term premiers, who were essentially thrown out by popular uprisings. The Printemps Érable is a pretty good demonstration of that, when Quebecers finally got sick and tired of Jean Charest's neoliberal approach. How much damage Francois Legault can do over the course of the next 4 years is of great concern. And it's cold comfort, I know, for a lot of people to say, well, hey, maybe it might lead to something better at the end. But we've got to try to be optimistic about things.
No, we really do. We really do. And, we're likely to see Quebec's two historical parties of government totally decimated tonight. Yeah. With polls predicting a Liberal Party reduced to as few as 20 seats in West Montreal and off-island, while the Parti Québécois will be lucky if they walk away with 3 or maybe 4 representatives elected, this year. How dramatic has the collapse of these two political institutions been over the last 5 years?
So I would say that it's a lot more dramatic for the Liberals, considering the history of that party, how long it's been a party, how powerful that party has been. to have them reduced to 20 seats is really unfortunate. I think Dominique Anglade got a really raw deal this time around. It reminds me a lot of what happened to Kim Campbell in 1992, 1993. Essentially, people were so fed up with Brian Mulroney and his style of governance that they basically took it out on Kim Campbell. Didn't really give her a fair chance. So I feel Dominique Anglade is still, unfortunately, paying. She's paying the price for what Philippe Couillard did and other liberal premiers before that. That being said, she's also paying for not opposing Bill 96 as strongly as she could have. It seemed like she was maybe a little bit wishy-washy on that at the beginning, and that cost her. It literally, led to the creation of two parties that were specifically created to oppose Liberal Party dominance on that issue. And then kind of out of nowhere, Eric Duhaime, sort of comes out of right field and says, well, he too also opposes Bill 96 for suspect reasons. And so it's weird to see a party get hit on two sides. For the Parti Québécois, I feel for them because, again, we're talking about a party that was obviously historically significant, incredibly historically significant for the people of Quebec. And I think there was a time that the Parti Québécois was a lot more moderate in tone. I don't feel bad for Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, who decided to double down on xenophobia, xenophobic tendencies, to essentially move to the right, often to the right of the right-wing parties, be it the CAQ or the Parti conservateur du Québec. And so for him to double down on the politics of identity, to talk about, to resist increasing immigration, especially at the tone that he have, it's hard to feel sorry for him. But I feel that in the broader sense of things, Quebec is losing out when both those parties perform so poorly. There was a time I think the Parti Québécois was a lot more moderate and also a lot more open to trying to convince the people of Quebec that a future independent Quebec would be cosmopolitan, would be open to other people. And it feels that Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon has brought the party in the wrong direction by doubling down on its worst tendencies. So I don't feel so bad for him. I do feel bad for Dominique Anglade, who performed well, particularly in the second debate. And I think that she just got a raw deal right from the get-go, and that's unfortunate.
Interesting. And later we'll be exploring this hour with Pivot investigative journalist Sam Harper about how weird it is that the Conservative Party of Quebec will probably elect 0 members of the National Assembly with as much as 15% of the vote. How bad do you think the vibe is right now for Eric Duhaime supporters tonight?
So that's a great question. I think the supporters are going to be disappointed, obviously. It'll be weird if they end up carrying the torch of electoral reform, which of course was supported by Francois Legault when he was in opposition, just like Justin Trudeau, big fan of electoral reform when they're in opposition. But of course, once they get power, they're not interested in it anymore. And of course, that it doesn't serve our democracy. It'll be really strange to see the right wing, essentially libertarian Conservative Party of Quebec become a champion for electoral reform. That said, I would fully expect Eric Duhaime to come out of tonight's election saying, oh, we did great. We were able to, everybody was talking about us. That guy dominated the airwaves in the Quebec City region, in the center of Quebec. He was able to perhaps pull some support away from the CAQ. He was able to make some inroads in the area sort of on the periphery of Montreal. It's unfortunate because Duhaime is he's a political wild card. He has worked for literally everybody as a consultant. He's a trash radio quote unquote journalist. He's a shock jock type of guy, but he's also a product of the Montreal Economic Institute, which is a libertarian think tank that's aligned with the Atlas Network. It's a global network of libertarian think tanks that have pushed climate science denial. They have promoted. They've been big supporters of big tobacco, among other things. And so that's the world that he comes out of is essentially inherently opposed to everything that is the Quebec state, the étatisme of Quebec, this idea that we're building, independent or not, we're going to build our own society and our own state apparatus. Duhaime is completely opposed to that, and the fact that he would garner so much attention and such a large percentage of the vote is surprising. It's indicative to me that things are changing in Quebec, perhaps not for the best. And even though he could have, if we had a really proportional system, he could have actually picked up some seats in the National Assembly. I'd still support that because it would mean that we would probably have fewer CAQ members, probably more QS members, et cetera, et cetera.
Interesting observations. And what about Quebec Solidar? How do you think they're feeling this evening? There's likely to match their 2018 seat count of about 10, which isn't a lot, but it's maintaining a solid block in the National Assembly regardless. Do you think that they're celebrating tonight at the QS HQ?
It's hard to say. I think the fact that their party is holding on is probably okay. Although that being said, it might get some people in the party to wonder whether they're going to continue with Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois. He did okay. The fact that he was goaded into using the N-word by a jerk in a debate is completely unforgivable as far as I'm concerned. And he absolutely should have known better. And there's a real possibility for Quebec Solidar to pick up disenfranchised Liberal Party voters, right? That could have been a serious, and they know that too, because of the fact that for a party ostensibly that does not ostensibly for a party that does support Bill 96, they know that they had candidates running in predominantly Anglo ridings who put out information in English. They're not apologizing for it. They want to win the election. But if they had just moderated their tone even slightly on Bill 96, or at least gave the impression that they recognize that there were some serious problems with it, that perhaps even the data is not correct about the decline of the French language. That's an important thing to know right there. And a lot of Anglophones and allophones know this. Just because the proportion of the Canadian population speaking French has declined by 1/10 of a percentage point does not mean that the total number of French speakers has declined. It hasn't. Right. It's only ever increased. There are more French speakers today in Canada than there have ever been. There are more allophones capable of speaking French better than most French people do, it's certainly better than a lot of Anglophones do. That's the reality. And the fact they've been totally scapegoated really does not line up with a lot of QS's other values. The fact they didn't realize this, didn't campaign stronger on trying to be a more inclusive vision. I would seriously consider Quebec independence, all right, even as a guy who was once on a show called Canada's Next Great Prime Minister, if QS just moderated the language law nonsense a little bit. And to me, the language, the issue of French in Quebec is just, it's a wedge issue designed to separate us from them, nous from vous autres. So it's unfortunate. They could have probably picked up a few more seats had they been a bit more moderate on that front. They tried to get disenfranchised PQ voters when they should have been going after disenfranchised Quebec Liberal Party voters.
Well, thank you so much, Taylor. Taylor C. Noakes is a Montreal-based independent journalist. You can read his latest piece, Quebec is Trading Social Solidarity for the Politics of Exclusion in Jacobin. Taylor, thanks a lot for helping us out tonight, and giving us a better frame of what was at stake this election.
Thank you so much for having me. Have yourself a good night.
Thank you. Thanks. Good night. So coming up next, we are excited to bring you a live reaction to tonight's results from Concordia campus pub Reggie's, where Pivot video journalist Una Barré is checking in with students about the issues that matter to them in the 2022 Quebec election. Una, hey, I'm handing it off to you tonight. What's the vibe for tonight? Okay, you just have to unmute yourself. Can't hear you, Una. We can't hear you yet. Can you hear me? Okay, so just a moment. We're going to hold on while we get that sorted out with Una Barré. She's at the Reggie's Pub tonight and going to be asking some questions to different students on, what they feel is to come up next in this election outcome. So just give us a moment. Bear with us. Okay. So in the meantime, while we're waiting, we're just going to check on some election results quickly. Just tuning in. Give us a moment. Still waiting for those results to come in. Just give us a moment here. It's hard to know what's going to happen tonight. It's really hard to know. I mean, we know, but we don't. You know, there's always surprises that come out of this, but the basics we know. Okay, yeah. Yeah, tonight for me, it's a bit of an emotional night because it's going to be a lot of similar outcomes, I think, from predictions it's looking at that from the 2018 election. I mean, we have the CAC that's, set to win, surely. But I am curious to see, how Quebec Solidar does play out regardless, just to know, how much has changed in the landscape of Quebec. I really thought that was interesting what Taylor mentioned as well, just about how, it is true. We love Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois, but that was a breaking point, a deal breaker for some Quebecois, I think, people of color during the debate there. And we can all learn from that. So it's going to be an interesting election for sure. We'll see how that. And I think we got Una Barre live now. Can I hear you, Una? Are you there? You're there? I can't hear you. Okay. Okay, so hey, Una, I'm going to hand it off to you now. How's the vibe tonight?
Hey, hi Maya.
Hey.
Thank you so much. So the vibe is pretty calm, like there's nobody, but people are coming. So we're gonna ask some students right there about like their reaction, about the election and everything. So here, nice to meet you. Like, what's your reaction about tonight and what's the most issue about the election?
The most important election, 100% we should all be focusing on it. It's not affecting only Quebec, it's affecting the world. And my reaction to the election, it's nice to see that young people are getting involved. They're more and more interested in politics because it's something that matters, and right now we have the power as people.
Great, thank you so much. So we're gonna ask some more people about like what are they viewing about the election and everything. The election is actually projected back there, so we're gonna see about more people. Can I ask some questions? Yeah. So can I ask maybe what's the most issue about the election and what's about tonight?
In my opinion, a lot of it is the turnout is just not going to be great because people are not really engaged in the politics, and the proportionality in the ridings in Quebec is very like a huge issue that nobody really talks about. So the urban vote doesn't really get the proper say. So you get a lot of conservative parties able to force like divisive issues like Bill 96, Franco versus Anglos, stuff like that.
So, what are your expectations for tonight?
I think it's definitely going to be a CAC win. It's going to be how big the win is. It doesn't matter how big it is; they are going to have a majority regardless. So there's not too much. I don't think there's too many stakes besides just a gauge on the health of the democracy in Quebec.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. See you after. Okay, so thank you, Maya.
Thanks, Una.
That was our first live here.
Great. Thank you, Una. We'll check in back with you later this evening. Okay, so next we're really excited to welcome. Okay, just give us a moment. We are connecting with our next guest. So going back to what I was saying before about my own reflections on this evening, just to I guess, make use of time. For me personally, I think this is a very pivotal election, just in the sense that, we want to see a new opposition. At the very least, we want to see a new opposition, and we're hoping that's going to be Quebec Solidar, or at least have some kind of significant outcome for them. I'm rooting for them. And I feel like a lot of all my peers are. So that's cool to see in Montreal, just that changing landscape and increased interest of Quebec Solidar, hopefully beyond the city to the rest of Quebec as well. I'm incredibly impressed by their policies. I'm from Ontario, so we don't have a Quebec Solidar. NDP is not the same. So it's really cool to see. Mm-hmm. So, and like, I feel like something for me, particularly if we were to talk more about aspects of society that we need to really explore when it comes to these election outcomes and what's at stake, really, you know, it would have to do with healthcare as one of them, right? There's this like increased privatization that's happening right now. Significantly in Quebec, but Ontario as well. I mean, Ford's, you know, now at this point, he's just loosely talking about it. And that's scary, you know, for publicly funded healthcare, that we shouldn't have to worry about that. And we got Sam coming in now, so I'll stop rambling. So next, we're really excited to welcome Sam Harper. He's an investigative journalist and a member of the French language Solidarity Journalism Co-op, Pivot. He joins us tonight from Bas-Saint-Laurent, north of Quebec City. Sam, welcome to the broadcast. Hey, Sam, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for asking. So we're going to hop right into it. You know, first question we have here for you tonight is, you know, they've been averaging around 15% in the polls throughout this 36-day campaign. But it looks like they won't elect a single representative of the National Assembly legislature. How surprised are you by the results tonight for the Quebec Conservative Party? Is this reassuring, and what's next for the party?
Well, it's pretty tough. Like, is it surprising? Not so much. I mean, with our first past the post system, I think your previous guest explained it pretty well, that Francois Legault had promised to reform the election mode, and once he got into power, well, basically reneged on that, and recently said that nobody was interested in electoral reform, and it was only something that a few intellectuals were interested in. Since nobody was fighting in buses about it, that he wasn't going to bother. It kind of is surprising that the Conservative Party made it up to 15%, but that they're not able to win, we'll have to see. At the same time, they're pretty close in at least two ridings, like Beauce Nord, Beauce Sud is pretty close. Chauveau, where Éric Duhem is a candidate, could still surprise us. And we saw with Claire Sanson, which was the only Conservative Party member of Parliament that they had last Parliament, he was able to get his message out, no problem, with just one person there. So I think that even if he only gets one MP in, the Conservative Party is something that's going to be in the political landscape for the years to come. If they don't, I don't know. I think Éric Duhem's in there for the long haul, and his main, what he's done is push the CAQ to the right. I mean, before they had their, let's say, the Liberal maybe, and especially Quebec Solidar, where they had to kind of like not move too far right, but now we had somebody pulling them on the other end, and we saw it with tax cuts, with healthcare privatization, that he managed to do that.
Interesting. Very interesting. And can you tell us more about Éric Duhem? You know, he's obviously the Conservative Party leader, former Quebec City Radio Poubelle shock jock, and former advisor to Stockwell Day and Stephen Harper. Is that right? Tell us a little bit more about this freak and his rise to influence in contemporary Quebec politics. Please.
He's been a lifelong libertarian activist. He was present at a meeting in 1995. There were these five young libertarian people. I don't know. I imagine them in some basement having a beer or something. And one of these was the now head of the Montreal Economic Institute. And there they decided that, well, the things that they needed to do to get like libertarian ideas to have a foothold in Quebec, because it really wasn't a part of the political landscape here, was to relaunch the Montreal Economic Institute, to start a libertarian newspaper, which was Le Québécois Libre, which was run by one now close advisor to Maxime Bernier of the PPC. And after that, he founded the Réseau Liberté Québec, which with four or five other people, which was basically this right-wing Woodstock festival kind of thing, where it was basically to promote networking of the right. Like, the idea was that there was no social conservatives here in Quebec, so they didn't really touch on those kind of issues, abortion, gay rights, same-sex marriage, things like that. They were really, it was economic and right-wing libertarian, and try to get those people together with more identitarian and nationalistic right-wing. And that didn't last very long, from maybe until 2013. And as you said, yeah, he was a radio commentator. He worked also for Rebel Media. So he's been an advisor to pretty much every party in existence. He worked for the PQ, worked for the Bloc, Stockwell Day, like you said. And also probably pretty notably, he was one of the advisors for Mario Dumont and the ADQ, which is kind of the ancestor to the CAQ. And a lot of the libertarians saw hope with Mario Dumont. They thought that he was going to be the champion of their ideas. And then when their party was gobbled up by Francois Legault, a lot of them felt disillusioned because they didn't think that Legault was going far enough on the right-wing economic platform.
Interesting. Thanks for that background, and he talks a lot about ordinary people and freedom. What is his attitude towards social movements like unions, for example?
It's kind of funny because they do talk a lot about freedom and about ordinary people, and he's got this very populistic kind of discourse. But first of all, you can see that he was basically traumatized, I think, by the student strike movement of 2012. That seems to have hurt him personally. Actually, from some of the platform of the Réseau Liberté Québec, that still made its way through into the new PCQ platform is his stuff on reforming student unions. Like, there's a lot of language in there about stopping these illegal strikes, stop it so that students are allowed to go to school and aren't prevented by these nasty strikers. And also like that, student unions should be only there to, basically organize a dance at the end of the semester, and, none of this political crap. On unions, he hasn't touched that issue during the election. It's not in their platform, and I think he knows that touching that would be pretty difficult for him. But he was on the board of an organization called the Workplace Democracy Institute until 2021, and he started in 2014. So for 7 years, he was on this board. And it's not a group that advertises very much, but from what we were able to gather, they did do fundraising to help like strikebreakers at an IKEA store in British Columbia. And they tried to help to prevent maintenance workers at an aluminium factory in Quebec to unionize, and different things like that, where, the discourse is all about employee choice, but it's basically the choice of the one person that doesn't want a union in opposition with the others who do.
Very interesting. And what are the origins of that party? A lot of its popularity seems as though it's due to pandemic, vaccines, mask mandates, quarantines. Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah. I don't think I don't think the PCQ would be where it is if it hadn't been for the pandemic. And I'm not sure it'll be there in 4 years at the next election unless they find something else to kind of like rally around. It was a very small, obscure party. It was founded in 2009 and then kind of left to die. The former leader, Adrien Pouliot, resurrected it in 2012. And at that time, he rewrote the platform and took out all the social conservative parts out of the party, and basically reoriented it as an economic right-wing libertarian type party. And when Duhaime became, he was elected with like 96% of the votes. It was a pretty overwhelming majority for him, and the membership went from like 500 members in the party to 55,000 members. So it's a huge gain in membership. And from a lot of the speeches that we heard from people that were candidates, a lot of it was anger around the pandemic, about businesses being closed. There's a lot of like small business owners that were gravitated towards the PCQ. A lot of people upset that they weren't able to socialize, weren't able to have all the different. And I mean, that's really what seems to have galvanized a lot of his support. I mean, then they tried to get these like big causes like increasing the speed limit for off-road vehicles and stuff, but I mean, that hasn't lifted very much.
And moving on, it's not a surprise that healthcare was also an issue this election. What does the CAQ have in store for the healthcare system?
You're right that it wasn't a surprise. One thing that was kind of a surprise was that the actual like management of the pandemic wasn't much of an issue during the campaign. I mean, nobody, apart from maybe the PCQ that kind of kept hitting, and even they kind of held back on that front. I mean, we didn't have the most glorious of results. We just think about the especially elder care and long-term healthcare hospitals here in Quebec, where there were like a staggering number of deaths, especially in the first wave of the pandemic, and that wasn't really discussed at all during this campaign. One thing that the CAQ is promising is they have this whole plan to, like they say, to reform the healthcare system without really changing the structures. So at least they're not trying to reinvent the rule this time. And there's a lot of emphasis on trying to attract more healthcare workers to especially keep the healthcare workers that they have, because they have a big problem of people leaving the system. And they've promised to end mandatory overtime, which has been plaguing the system here for a long time, where, for example, nurses have, you go in for an 8-hour shift, and 15 minutes before the end, well, you're told, well, we don't have enough nurses for the next shift, so you have to stay for another 8 hours. Then they're working for 16 hours that day. Dubé, the health minister, put a lot of emphasis on data too. He's very big so he's working too on bills to facilitate sharing data across agencies and things. One thing that they've started to do and that they have promised to do more of is to introduce what they call competition, and they call it it's financement à l'activité. So it's I don't know what the English term is. It's where they said the money follows the patient. So instead of, for example, a hospital getting the same budget every year and you get the money according to what you've historically needed, well, you have to bill the government for every medical procedure that you've done. So this is one thing that the PCQ has also advocated for. And what they've introduced this time is this idea of these new private super clinics. So something in between your family doctors, GMF, the family medicine group, and a full-blown hospital. There'd be like these super clinics that would be privately run. We don't really know what they're going to look like, but that's been promised. And basically a lot more use of private for-profit clinics to deliver surgeries. And that's been kind of gearing up in the last years too. That's searched quite a bit, like just between 2020 and today, we spent like 157 million on private surgeries in no-bid contracts. Wow. Under cover of the pandemic, mostly saying, oh, well, our our waiting times are so long, so we were just like subsidizing these clinics.
Wow. The Conservatives are also pushing for more private healthcare and for injecting some good old competition to make everything more efficient. Is there much difference with what the CAQ is proposing and what they're proposing?
Well, I think it's a question of degree. Like there's, the CAQ are trying to be the reasonable privatizers, whereas DUM is the cowboy privatizer, just like let's privatize everything that moves. But some of the ideas kind of crept up during the campaign. I think, like I said before, like that's where DUM's role is that he proposes these pretty radical ideas, and then the CAQ kind of does the same thing, but not as radical. One thing that the Conservatives were proposing that the CAC hasn't touched yet is to allow people to buy private insurance for medical services that are medical acts, that are covered by the healthcare system. Because once that door's opened, well, then the floodgates are open and people can basically go to private healthcares. Right now, you need to be able to pay upfront, but if you could buy a private insurance, that would be one of the things that the private sector is advocating for and lobbying for a lot. Also, the PCQ has promised that they would open totally for-profit hospitals. So not these super clinics, but an actual hospital that would be run like a business.
And last question we have for you, Sam, before we let you go. Do we know if adding more private clinics will help to lower costs or reduce waiting times? This must have been studied and evaluated before, right?
Well, it has been studied, and I guess they evaluated it, but they didn't tell us. That's one thing. There was a pilot program that was launched by the former government. It was the minister, Gaëtan Barrette, who had started this program in 2016, if I remember correct, or 17. It was launched in 2016, but it actually got off the ground in 2017. And it was renewed by the current government in 2019, where they had these 3 private clinics where they would send patients to that were on waiting lists for more than 6 months, and basically they could have 1-day surgeries. And the object of the pilot program at the beginning was really, we're going to evaluate the costs, and we're going to be able to compare if it's really cheaper or not. He said, and Barrette when he announced this program said, the private sector keeps telling us that they can do it better and for less money. Well, now we're going to know for sure, and then we're going to have the proof and blah blah blah. It was supposed to cost about $4 million a year, and while we've sunk $72 million in this pilot project in the last couple of years, and the last year of the program, 2019 to 20, the cost was actually 7 times more than what was planned. So it was more closer to I think 20 something million instead of the 4 that it was supposed to be. And the government still hasn't released any data. Very recently, they told us that it was confidential and that this data belonged to there was information in there that belonged to these private clinics, and therefore they couldn't tell us. So no, we don't know. So is it cheaper? Is it not cheaper? We don't know. And also, is there more resources? Isn't all that clear, because one of the big problems is when you open these private clinics, they need staff. And where do they find their staff? Well, in the public sector. So often what happens is they just drain resources from the public sector to the private sector. And the CAC has kind of opened the door, even though, at the beginning of the campaign, they said that they wouldn't let doctors ride both sides of the fence. Because right now, normally, if you're in the public sector, you can't at the same time work in the private sector. You can't bill patients directly. And in the last weeks, Legault kind of opened the door to, well, maybe we'll let doctors do both, and then they'll have more resources and this and that. But the problem with in circumstances where there's an actual there's not enough personnel, and these people, they're actually looking for people to work there, then often the public sector just sees their staff draining out.
Right. Thanks for that insight, Sam. Sam Harper is an investigative journalist with Pivot, joining us tonight from Le Bas-Saint-Laurent, east of Quebec City. Sam, thanks a lot again for your perspective and your insight this evening. It was really appreciated.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good night. So next up, we have Coralie Beaumont. She's a contributing columnist for Pivot with a focus on law and the environment. She spoke with CUTV broadcasting coordinator Andre Goulet over the weekend about how issues surrounding the environment have influenced the 2022 campaign.
Let's do it. Coralie, the Coalition Avenir Québec is on track to win a second term. What do you think of the environmental actions that we've seen from this party over the last 4 years?
I think that these elections are an important political test for Quebec. Will the provincial government adopt ambitious solutions for the climate and biodiversity, or on the contrary, will its policies be counterproductive? At the moment, the government of Francois Legault is not an environmental leader. As a reminder, the CAQ, so Coalition Avenir Québec, was elected 4 years ago without a real commitment to the protection of the environment. But during its mandate, the government of Francois Legault had no choice but to adapt in face of the popular pressure in favor of the fight against global warming. All over the world, but also in Quebec. Indeed, 2 years ago in Montreal, 500,000 people marched for the climate with Greta Thunberg. And this year, in September, there were almost 200,000 climate protesters in the street again. However, we cannot ask the population to constantly demonstrate for the climate in the street. These many protests should be enough now to remind the government to take action based on environmental science without delay. Actually, the current government objective was to reduce the province's greenhouse gas emission by only 37% in 2030 compared to 1990. Which is not an ambitious target, and the action put in place can even reach it. A striking example of one of the most important political projects of Francois Legault of the Coalition Avenir Québec is le troisième lien.
Yeah, and le troisième lien, we hear a lot about this in the discourse around this election, and I know it's connected to the environment somehow, but what is le troisième lien? What is that?
It's a construction, actually it's the project of a construction of 2 tunnels between Quebec and Lévis to facilitate road traffic. But I have never found just one expert who think that can be a good idea from an environmental point of view or even from a mobility point of view. Indeed, for months now, experts have denounced the predicted increase of greenhouse gases emission and urban sprawl associated with this project. And it has been proven for years now that adding traffic lanes does not reduce car traffic, on the contrary. But still, this construction below Fleuve Saint-Laurent would cost more than $6 billion. So it's a very large amount of money. And at the same time, Francois Legault is reluctant to give more money to municipalities to adapt to climate change because he fears an extra burden for Quebecers. Yet, we absolutely need consistency and structuring projects to allow Quebec to align with a future where the climate has become a threat.
Right, the financial burden of supporting greening the province compared to the financial burden of building 2 tunnels under the St. Lawrence River to Quebec to connect Quebec City and its suburb city of Lévis. So does the CAQ support these kind of projects? Like, are they interested in transportation? Are they interested in like green technology? What about that?
Perfect. And I will stick to the theme of transportation because that represents 43% of Quebec greenhouse gas emission. For the moment, the CAQ is focusing mainly on the electrification of personal cars. The electric car in Quebec is at best a half solution. Fortunately, Quebec has many hydroelectric dams, so our electricity is obviously less polluting than if they were produced with oil, gas, or worse, coal. But still, electric cars require a lot of precious resources, sometimes at the expense of human rights all over the world. They use a lot of public space for private goods, promote urban sprawl to the detriment of the natural environment, not to mention the issue of battery recycling. We must also develop more and more highly polluting infrastructure for this car, like le troisième lien. So on the contrary, building a rail network for travelers, improving and electrifying public transportation, bike paths are important projects that reduce greenhouse gas emission as proven by science. However, reducing these emissions involves public funding and a paradigm shift from everything for the car. So I don't think it should be a maybe. Those projects should be a common ground among politicians, including those of the CAQ, Coalition Avenir Québec. Even more, I think that it's not just a question of reducing green gas emissions, it's also a question of expertise. If the current government does not move forward in the direction of environmental transition, it risks to slowing down the development of a precious expertise in Quebec to deal with this increasingly difficult environmental issue in the future. So I think that more than ever, we need to learn how to develop sustainable living environments, protect and restore ecosystem, and help farmers to adapt to a warming climate. But it does not happen in a day, and unfortunately, Hurricanes Ian and Fiona have painfully reminded us that there is not a day to lose. So I want to conclude and say that I think that the world is at crossroad to act and adapt to climate change and the collapse of biodiversity. The climate is warm by more than 1 degree Celsius for now, and another additional degree must absolutely be avoided. So I sincerely hope that in the future will show that the government Legault understands the urgency of the situation and will act with ambition and coherence.
Coralie Beaumont is a contributor to Pivot, where her recent articles include J'ai demandé à un robot de dessiner notre avenir environnemental and Et si nous voulons que le prix du gaz monte encore. Coralie, thanks a lot for speaking with us today.
Thank you very much for having me here.
And now we have Alexis Rose, is the editor-in-chief of the Solidarity Journalism Co-op Pivot. He's here to share his thoughts on Quebec Solidar's electoral campaign and the way it was received by the media. Alexis, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for having all of us from Pivot.
Thank you for being here. Thank you. So let's get right into it. Let's explore Quebec Solidar's campaign in this election. What did they focus on, and how well did it work?
Well, the first thing that is evident for me is that QS chose to conduct a more centrist campaign than ever before. And notably, the thing that struck me is that they decided to aim their campaign at the middle class. They posed as defenders of the middle class and of Quebecers in general, but they did not present themselves as defenders of the more oppressed or the more marginalized among the society. So they do have more progressive stuff in their platform, but that's not necessarily what they focused on. And they chose to put forward what is more appealing for the middle class. So a good example of it would be their policies regarding housing. They put forward something which they call affordable houses, which is $1 billion for offering like 10,000 affordable houses for the first-time buyers to help them access homeownership. This is not bad in itself, but it's not a policy that is addressed to those of us who still struggle even to find a roof, an apartment to live in. So they also promised in their campaign and in their platform $3.2 billion for 50,000 social and affordable apartments, all of them in a first term. This is not bad, it is good, even if it is still half of what the community organization working in the field of housing asked for. So, well, this is not bad, but still both measures, houses and social housing, were on an equal footing during the Quebec Solidar when in the platform and in the campaign. So I think it is very symptomatic of the way QS tried to appeal to the middle class interest and pose as the defender of the middle class and not of the more oppressed. Also, they almost didn't talk about what we could call particular issues with avec des gros guillemets, like women's issues, also immigration. When they talked about immigration, it was always in a very instrumental way, like a way of fighting labor shortage. So they did a little better with indigenous issues. They were the only one really defending indigenous rights as if it was as if indigenous were people, they are people, and they addressed the problem in such a manner that it was the way they presented it. But still, it's not what they focused on. A very interesting exception to a QS centrist and moderate stance was their wealth tax. So they proposed a tax between 0.1% and 1.5% for individuals owning more than $1 million in net assets. So this is interesting, but when they proposed it, QS was attacked from all sides, parties and pundits alike. So they pretty much stopped talking about it very rapidly. So we'll come back to this, but it wasn't interesting, but it did not have enough place, in my opinion, in the debate.
Right. And what, speaking of that, discussing all that, what would you say the rhetoric is currently for Quebec Solidar's recent campaign? What are your thoughts on that?
So there's this thing about policy I just mentioned, but it's, as you said, it's not only about policy, it's also about rhetoric and the way you shape your discourse to appear one way or the other and influence the social discourse. And well, in their rhetoric, Quebec Solidar tried very much to present themselves as reasonable, harmless, normal, in line with the common sense, and not as original, subversive, and evidently not as radicals. So they could have tried to break with the conventional politics and to show it, but that's not what they did. They said, we're not out there, we swear, we're normal, we're not scary. Because in the leaders' debate, Francois Legault tried to scare people when talking about the orange tax, the wealth tax, and all those kind of things. And the answer from Quebec Solidar was very clear. We are not scary. Nobody should be afraid of us, not even the rich and the powerful, I guess. So that's what I noted. And also, when they had interesting progressive policies, they tended to present them as better technical solutions to the problem we know, instead as rooted in another way of approaching politics and understanding society and defending other values like social justice instead of profit, for example, and power. So a good example of this is when they presented their environmental platform. They insisted a lot that it had been reviewed by independent experts, and this is very good. I mean, we want our ecological measures to be rooted in science, and it is important to remember that the capital and private interests are against all that the science has to tell us ecology-wise. But why not say that? Why not say that that it's capital, that it's the rich, that is the fossil industry and all those things that are the root of the problem, and why not put forward policies attacking those interests? Like at the leaders' debate, the PQ proposed at the 25% tax on the excess profit of the oil industry, and QS said nothing about that. So in the tone, in the rhetoric, the PQ was more in finding culprits, if I could say, and QS was more like they had a very non-aggressive tone, non-divisive tone, in which there were no enemy, So maybe their only enemy was Prime Minister Francois Legault, because he is in QS discourse. It's like Francois Legault is incompetent. It's not because he's right wing. It's not because he defends those or those interests. It's because he's incompetent. And QS and Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois should replace him. So they had this very non-divisive rhetoric. And when Gabriel Nadeau presented the policies of QS, he was always presenting them as defending the Quebecers at large, and not the poor or the marginalized, as I said earlier.
Very interesting. Interesting insight.
Maybe the only strong exception to this, again, was the wealth tax, when an economist from QS went on TVA to present it. The animators said, "Oh, so there was this backlash against your measure. So what does it mean? Does it mean that it was not a good idea?" And the economist said, "No. You see, this backlash means that we have something original, something new to propose, and that's why people react in such a way." So that was a great moment of showing that they have something new to propose, but it's not the general rhetoric QS used during this campaign. So,
any other points you would like to expand on with that question?
Yeah, well, maybe there's the fact that, because I say that and it's very critical and everything, but I guess it's what QS judged was necessary to aspire to power, to appear like a reasonable alternative to the government we have right now. But I mean, I understand this will to appease the people, but on the other hand, it does not seem that it worked so well, because, well, we don't have the results yet, but what we know from the polls before in the last weeks is that QS stood at around 15% of the vote, which is almost what they had last time.
Right.
So I wonder if it was the good strategy. I wonder if it would have worked better with another rhetoric. But what we can see is that Duhem's way of channeling and fueling discontent about the system worked pretty well for him. He went from 1.5% of the vote. He was not the chief, but his party had 1.5% of the vote, and now he has 15%. So could have it then could it have been an alternative for QS? Maybe.
Interesting, right? So it's a question of whether that rhetoric is, radical enough to really draw in those new voters. Last question I have for you, Alexis. It's just to talk a little bit about QS once again, and how they were attacked by the media with this proposal of a new wealth tax. It shouldn't be a controversial policy. Why do you think the media piled on the QS the way it did? And what did that moment in the campaign tell us about the Quebec media's relationship to power in this province?
Well, the first thing it tells us about, in my opinion, is about the political culture here in Quebec. So maybe, there are leaders in other countries like Jean-Luc Mélenchon in France, who chose this more aggressive and more divisive and more radical rhetoric, and it worked-ish for them. But I don't think it's necessarily something that could be done easily here in Quebec. So that's what the backlash around the wealth tax showed. And what it told about the media here in Quebec is whom their instinctive feeling of solidarity goes to. Like, it's the rich and the powerful, because when sorry, I have notes. When they presented their wealth tax, there was a series of attacks against them, many of them claiming that we should be wary of such an idea because, many of us are millionaires. That's what we could read in the media. But QS had made calculations based on the StatCan, Statistique Canada data, and it showed us that only 5% of people in Quebec would be targeted by a wealth tax for those having net assets over $1 million. But it's not the feeling the pundits had, When the economist I talked about earlier went on TVA to present the wealth tax, the animator was very, very aggressive with him. And he told him that it was not a good measure because we should not punish people who worked very hard. So first thing. And then he said that many viewers of the show would be targeted by the measure. And even when the economist told him that it was not the case, that it was only 5% of the people, and that's what the data showed, he said, well, but I know many people who are millionaires. So I think it tells us a lot about the not only the feelings of solidarity those pundits have, but which class they are part of.
What circles they're in.
Exactly. So I think that is very revelatory in itself. And I don't know if I have a few minutes more or something.
I think that's what we have for you. I think we're good. We're going to wrap that up. But thank you, Alexis. Thank you for your insight.
Well, thanks a lot.
Greatly appreciated. And there's a bit of a rescheduling. So next, I believe it's going to be Clément. Is that right? Okay. So Drew, actually, we're going to have Drew OJ come on. He's the director of CUTV. And just give us a moment here. And he's on.
Hi there.
Hello.
So I was asked to give a quick update on some of the election results. So with not that many votes counted, I think there are a total of, let's see, just 287 out of 21,000 polls reporting. We have the CAQ, Coalition Avenir Quebec, in a strong lead with 52% of the vote. So obviously a lot of those early ridings are a lot of like small sort of polling areas and stuff. So it's not super indicative of what's going to happen. But yeah, we have the Parti Québécois is in second place with 15.5. I would expect that to fall. And then we have the Liberals, and then the Conservatives are actually in third with 11%, and then the Liberals are right after that with 10.9, and QS is straggling along behind. So perhaps some validation for the theses that were sort of advanced earlier that that said that they were mistaken to go after disaffected PQ voters or disaffected instead of disaffected Liberal voters. It's been a really interesting discussion so far, I have to say, in terms of the sort of the Quebec Solidar strategy discussion. I mean, clearly they made the choice very strongly to go in the direction of embracing the sort of the activist base of the sort of nationalist sovereignist movement. And clearly did that to the exclusion of, as Alexis was saying, any other sort of marginalized communities. Although I would say they did mount a pretty strong defense of immigrant communities in the last week of the campaign. But the contradictions of having sort of embraced that option nationale sort of approach. I think really came out in the as you were discussing with Taylor, the use the being goaded into mentioning the title of Pierre Valliere's book and different things like that really indicate the sort of contradictions, I think, of that policy of sort of rejecting the sort of bigger tent. But less sort of, picking the sort of mobilized activist base that they know they can count on to go knock on doors for them over the bigger number of sort of disaffected voters who don't necessarily want to focus, don't want to be laser focused on another referendum or sort of focused on independence and as a result are being vulnerable to sort of getting trapped in this are you nationalist enough sort of prison. Anyway, those are my quick reflections on the discussion so far. It's been a very interesting discussion.
Very, very interesting. Thank you for that, Drew, the insight, and also just getting that update on where we're at right now. I think we're going to now have on Una Barré. who's going to be talking to Nora Loreto and Chris Curtis. Okay, I'm going to just move right on then. So moving on, we have Chris Curtis. Yeah. Okay. Just give us a moment. We're just connecting still. Okay, hello, welcome back. So we're just still waiting on Una Barre, who we're going to be connecting with soon. She'll be speaking with Nora Loreto and Chris Curtis. And, for now, we're just going to continue our conversation with Alexis. Hello, once again.
Hi again.
And we're going to go back to what we were talking about. We were talking about Quebec Solidar. We were talking about campaign, communication, strategy a bit too. And then ultimately just this media backlash that we feel that Quebec Solidar has faced throughout this campaign with wealth tax and beyond. Can you just expand on that? Any other comments you'd like to make?
Yeah, well, the backlash was mainly, the backlash I thought more about is mainly about the wealth tax, because when they put it forward, they decided to, when they proposed the wealth tax and it was received with the backlash, they decided to not talk about it anymore. And I think it maybe influenced the rest of the campaign, where they decided very much to be nice. But still, what struck me is that it continued to linger in the media sphere, and in the end, it still played in their against Quebec Solidar, because a few days ago, Brian Miles, the director of Le Devoir, which is the last independent media daily newspaper here in Quebec, and which is supposed to be left-wing-ish, he published his electoral editorial, in which he takes position. He says who to vote for, in his opinion, and he said that he supported the CAQ and said that QS should be in the official opposition because they were reasonable, but they proposed a wealth tax, and that is no way for him. And what was very interesting for me is that he admitted that Legault had no serious plan for the environment, that he had been very anti-democratic during the pandemic, that he said many controversial things about immigration in the last day. So you can understand that he meant racist, but he said controversial because for him it's only abstract political correctness and not human rights.
Rhetoric, yeah.
But in the end, even if Legault was all those things, it was better to vote for him because he didn't want to tax the rich. So it's not only that when we talk about wealth and power, media side with the powerful, it's also that overall, it's the most important thing for those pundits. We have to defend the powerful, even if it means destroying the environment, attacking human rights and democracy. So that's very, I mean, I was surprised by that, but in the end, it's not very surprising, you know? And
when you look at other countries where something like a wealth tax is just, the norm, what does that say on a larger level? Would you say Quebec, but Canada as a country in itself, for this to be such a controversy still? Does it feel kind of archaic at all to you? Does it feel appropriate for the time period that we're in, post-pandemic especially, that this kind of outcry and backlash would be so vocal, even like beyond just the media, but even just among the general public and population? Or is it something to you that's not a huge surprise?
I'm not surprised because, in fact, one reason I think Quebec Solidar can't do what Jean-Luc Mélenchon, for example, did in France, having this more aggressive and radical rhetoric, is because here in Quebec, we have strong social movements if we compare with some strong social movements. If we compare with the United States, for example, our student movement is one of the strongest in America. But the student movement is not so strong. Actually, well, it's rebuilding itself around the climate justice issue, but it's not. There is no central leftist radical organization in the student movement. And the labor unions are very moderate too. They're working on building a common front right now, so this is good news. But I think that this lack of strong social movement explains the difficulty for Quebec Solidar to propose more radical ideas, because if they did, they would be alone, or they would seem to be alone proposing it, instead of being part of a larger movement that could help them push those demands. So I think it's very one of the main reason there was this backlash, and in the general opinion, we don't seem to be in favor of more radical policies like that. It's because a party that would promote them would be alone, or would look like alone, because the social movements are still small-ish and not very. They do not form a strong coalition working together. And I think it's maybe one of the thing with Quebec Solidar is that they, I don't think, well, I'm not in the know, but what I see from the outside is that I don't think they have very strong links with social movements. They work a lot on communication strategy, but not in power building strategy. So I think it could be a way to work toward more leftist power in the future, to build this power, and for Quebec Solidar to build links with the growing social movements we have here in Quebec.
Right, because I feel like Montreal particularly, we have, even just movements that are really protecting migrant rights, for instance, right? Would you say that generally, I mean, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but like migrant networks, migrant rights groups, have they had a very firm support for Quebec Solidar, and other advocates from different pockets kind of Montreal? Is that something that could improve in terms of that relationship more on an organic, on the ground level?
Well, I named the unions and the student movements, but they are not the only movement. Like you said, there are the migrant rights movement, there are the feminist movement, there is the anti-racist movement, and they are radical, they are firm, they are active, but they are not part so much of a coalition with the party. And I think it's very good that all those organizations are not submitted to the party and they can be critical. Like a few days ago, we had the housing organization saying that okay, Quebec Solidar did well, but they are not perfect, and criticizing them on some aspects. So I think it's important we have that, but I think if at least they could, I don't know, like have a common ground of what is supposed to defend, it would help.
Interesting. Well, thanks again, Alexis, for your time. Who knows, we might get you back up here one more time, but for now, we will let you go. Thanks again. We're going to turn it over now to Clément. Give me a moment here when I pull that up. So we have next journalism student, Clément Lechat. Oh. So the guest will be Christine Saint-Pierre. It's the former Minister of International Relations and La Francophonie from the previous Liberal government. And she's the current MNA for Acadie. Okay, so we're actually still tuning in. Okay, could you give us a little bit? Everything's still connecting. It's taking a bit of time. So would you mind giving us a little bit of insight yourself on Christian Saint-Pierre? Sorry for my French pronunciation.
Yeah, well, if I understood correctly, Clément is going to be at a Liberal event in somewhere in the west of Montreal, and Christine Saint-Pierre is a Liberal MNA from there, and so right now the Liberal Party is trying to appear more progressive. They are they under Jean Charest, which was the prime minister, the Liberal prime minister 10 years ago. The party was Jean Charest, who just participated in the leadership campaign for the Conservative Party in Canada. So Jean Charest is a conservative, and the Liberal Party under him was very conservative. So right now, the Liberal Party is trying to be more liberal, and maybe Christine Saint-Pierre wants to be part of this movement. But when I was part of the student strike in 2012, 10 years ago, Christine Saint-Pierre, she was I'm not sure what was her minister at this moment, but she made a comment that for me completely discredit her claim of being part of a Liberal Party, which is that Amnesty International was expressed concern about the way students and the strikers were treated by the police and the government in 2012. And Christine Saint-Pierre just answered and said, she was Minister of the International Affairs, I think. And she said, well, Amnesty can take care of their business. We're going to take care of ours. Oh my gosh. So that's the Christine Saint-Pierre we're going to talk to and see where the Liberal Party is aimed at.
Interesting. History. So give us a moment. We're getting Clément here to speak with us. Just give us a moment here. But very interesting. So that was your own Okay, so hello. We are back again. This time I'm excited to welcome a very special guest. Her name is Gabrielle Brassard-Lecourt. Oh, okay, we actually got Clément Lechat with us now. Perfect. Great. So Clément, welcome. Who are you speaking with tonight? Hey.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me in the show. I'm at Théâtre Corona right now in downtown Montreal, covering the Liberal Valley. And let's say that the atmosphere is quite peaceful here. Like it's kind of quiet for the moment. There are not a lot of guests here. I got the opportunity to talk to the MNA from Acadie, Christine Saint-Pierre. She's not available at the moment for the interview, but some insights from our conversation were that she's hopeful that Dominique Anglade will be re-elected tonight in Saint-Henri, Sainte-Anne. She truly believes that Anglade has a chance, and she is just available right now. We are with Christine Saint-Pierre. Thank you for being in the show with us. I just wanted to know what's the atmosphere, what's the mood for you right now?
I am a little bit disappointed because we don't win the selection. The government will be a CAC government, and Mr. Legault wins the selection, and this is disappointing for me. But we have a kind of relief. You have the opposition, official opposition. This is a relief. So now we have to make sure that we work very hard in the National Assembly of Quebec to make sure that the opposition with the Liberal Party of Quebec will challenge Francois Legault in every day and every decision.
Yes, and another question.
Yes.
Will Dominique Anglade have the credibility to be the leader of the party if she's not re-elected in Saint-Henri, Sainte-Anne?
We will have to. This is a decision that will be up to the militants and it's up to the members of the party. So the members of the party will decide what would happen. But I'm pretty confident that Mrs. Anglade will win the Saint-Anne. So after that, I think that we don't have we will have the energy to continue and to make sure that we will be a very good official opposition. This is the most important, and we will see what the members of the parties will want to do with the situation.
And the last question, traditionally the Liberal Party is the party of the Anglophones in the province, but many other parties have tried to challenge this, such as the Canadian Party of Quebec, the Conservatives, and Bloc Montréal, who tried during the campaign to attract Anglophones.
Yeah.
What would you say to an Anglophone who decided not to vote for the Liberals today?
It's not time to be in division. It's not time to be apart. It's time to be together and make sure that we will rebuild the Liberal Party of Quebec. This is not the time to be Joe-Party. I don't know how to say that in English, but
Divided.
It is divided.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, of course, the results are not yet very precise. It's getting more and more precise this time, and that's it for me.
Okay. Thank you, Clément, for that. So now we are going to take it off to Gabrielle Brassard-Lecourt. She's a professor of journalism at Concordia, a co-founder of Pivot and of Ricochet, and the president of the Association of Independent Journalists of Quebec. Gabrielle, help us make sense of what we're seeing with the seat count right now. What's your analysis on the evening so far?
Well, I mean, it's not a super big surprise. We knew that the CAC was going to be reelected, probably with a majority. The shot was called by the media at like 8:10, so like 10 minutes after the polls were closed. So this is not, that surprising. I think the rest of the evening will be more interesting with some close fights in different neighborhoods, particularly in Montreal. We know that the CAQ electoral base is not so much in Montreal, so it's mostly in the rest of the province. But in Montreal, we'll see. I mean, the last polls at one point in the election, Quebec Solidar was hopeful to be the official opposition, but now it's really the last polls, the last surveys. I mean. We're putting, the Liberals almost at the same point of Quebec Solidar, and the Parti Québécois, for some reason, every election, there's always like a little rise just before the votes. We don't really know why. Honestly, personally, I really thought it was like the death of the PQ this election, but surprisingly, I don't know if it's because their leader did somewhat of a good debate for some people, so it probably helped. We know that the debate in French Quebec has a big impact on the voters, especially the ones who haven't made their choice yet. So yeah, we'll see. But there's I think last time I checked, there were already 27 CAQ elected people. None other result, but we know that probably Quebec Solidar is gonna keep what they have. Liberals, it was a hard campaign for them. I think Dominique Anglade, her party didn't hold her back at all, so it was hard campaign for her. Honestly, I think she's just not in the right party because she's not so bad, but it's just like she tried to kind of, I don't know if it's a word, but she tried to leftize her party, but like the old
Natural.
like the old guard didn't put up with that at all. So she didn't. Yeah, she's probably gonna be gone, even tomorrow or something. So, and that's really in French. There's a specific term for that. We always say that women who do a job for the first time, we always say they hit the glass roof.
Yes,
but there's the glass ceiling, but there's also another expression, and it's called like a glass riff kind of thing, and it's when organizations are at their worst and women come in because they're good with crisis, they're good with care, and so they kind of they put the organization back again, and once the job is done, they're gone, and then the men come back again. Damage control, because you were so good at it. And I think this is totally what happened to Anglade. But I think that from the results, surprisingly, it's not probably gonna be as bad as it was predicted at the beginning of the election. Same thing for the PQ. And Quebec Solidar, we'll see. Their biggest challenge is always, outside of Montreal. It always has been. They had 4 last elections, so 2 in Quebec City, 1 in Abitibi, and another one in Sherbrooke. If they keep those 4, it's already a good thing, but it's not gained at all. So we'll see. We'll see about what happened in the rest of the evening.
Intriguing. And also, how do you think the debate, the last debates, how do you think that influenced the outcome so far? Do you think that made a difference at all?
Yeah, for sure. Especially so in French we have 2, one at TVA, which is, more of I think a sensationalist kind of debate. They fight a lot, they speak over each other, and it's always a little bit chaotic. I think a lot of people mostly watch the Radio-Canada one. And I think it does influence, especially the ones who aren't decided. They really vote on the performance of the leaders. So, and I think this partially explain why the PQ has a bit of a rise, because they thought the leader, who wasn't really known honestly before the beginning of the election, he did kind of a good job because he was very calm, and he had some good points, I guess. So yeah, I think the debate surely influences a lot of the especially the undecided voters, and I think it's too bad that there used to be some debate in English.
Right.
They weren't.
It's canceled this year,
Yeah, and I think this is really something that every party are gonna have to address at one point. I see it with my student at Concordia, and pretty much with a lot of Anglophone people around me that don't feel connected to the election, the Quebec election, with reason. The party don't address to them at all, never. And at one point, if you want to be an inclusive party, we are a bilingual, even if we're mostly French, we are a bilingual province. There are some communities that need to be consulted, and that need to feel concerned about issues that everyday issues. And I really do feel like the parties don't address those communities at all, especially the CAQ. But again, it's because their electoral base are not in Montreal at all. It's not in Montreal at all. So and we know that outside of Montreal,
the English speakers
are
small. Right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, very interesting insight.
Yeah.
And do you think that this particular election was particularly divisive? With some of the different subjects, because obviously a subject like language is something that's quite polarizing.
Yes.
Excuse me. As well as immigration policy.
For sure.
Even wealth tax, I guess, is divisive in some kind of way or
For
another.
sure.
What did you just your own observations, particularly in 2022 compared to 2018?
I feel like for a long time, election in Quebec had been about independence, which I don't feel is an actual is an issue anymore, really, especially when the young generation, I think, and I don't know if I'm young, but I'm going to speak for myself. I don't think it's the most pressing issue. I feel like climate change inclusivity is much more important, and so I feel like this were the issue where it was decisive, this election, especially with something like Bill 96. For me, this was a big mistake by Quebec Solidar to vote for that, especially for a leftist party that is supposed to be inclusive. I think they were a little bit like, damn if we do, damn if we don't vote for the law, because they do have a kind of small independent basis. That's not necessarily a majority, but that is, it was a coalition between Quebec Solidar and Option Nationale, which was very independent. So I think it was kind of to keep them around. They're activists that are more on that side. But by voting for it, you're also kind of saying, we don't really care about Anglos, and
because then where do they go, right? Like the Anglos, I mean, if you feel like your values align with most of Quebec Solidar, but then you are opposed to this particular law, I mean, I don't know where they
exactly
go. Yeah.
And newcomers, I mean, I dare anyone to learn any new language in 6 months.
Honestly, especially French.
Honestly, French. Even if you are,
yeah,
even if you're super immersed and you live in the city and you hear it, it's really hard to learn. Yeah, especially French. I totally agree with you.
Believe me, I'm 10 years and counting, and it's you saw me trip over your name.
And then we talk about labor shortage, but we're not gonna give job to those people because they don't speak French. I mean, it's for me, it was a big mistake from Quebec Solidar. So I feel like, immigration for sure is a big issue, especially again with the CAQ that don't really care about immigration, honestly. Again, I think it's always very electoralist. It's because it's not their base, their voting base.
Right. Just that recent comment from the CAC minister that mentioned about 80%
exactly
of immigrants
oh my
that
God,
don't
that
work. Like that's
crazy.
It's just so embarrassing.
I can't believe he wasn't like immediately canceled. Honestly,
like we don't like it. I know. I feel like there wasn't even the uproar that there really should have been.
No,
like
there was.
But sometimes I'm like, I'll like tune into Quebec politics and I'll just read these like wild headlines. I'm just like,
and
what?
you know what? I
Why
mean,
isn't everyone talking about
this minister says that, and like the Daily Scandal is like an influencer that did like a trend on TikTok with like a rapper song that was supposedly misogynist because it's a trend. I mean, I was like, really? This is the Daily Scandal and while we're like offended by a trend on TikTok, there's like this guy who says like 80% of immigrants don't speak French and don't, and like the conservateur leader Eric Duhem says that he wants to build a wall, and like this is we talk a bit about it, but it's not that controversial. It's as controversial as like a social media trend, for me it doesn't make any sense.
Well, I just like I didn't even know about Eric Duhem's previous comments about Black people not having any heroes or having very few. Like I just just reading that, I'm like, how does this guy? I mean, I know it's conservative, but still, like, how does he have that platform?
He's very weird. I mean, he's gay, and he wrote a book about saying that like gayness doesn't exist anymore. I mean, it's really weird.
Existential crisis. Yeah. So we're gonna wrap it up now. Thank you so much, Gabrielle. That was super interesting. I'm going to tune in now. Where are we going next? Just checking in. Next up, we will be right back soon. Just give us a moment. Connecting to the next guest. Hello. So we are back with André Goulet.
Maya, I got some bad news.
Oh no, what's the bad news?
It's not looking good. Looks like the CAC got a second majority. Okay, not that close to the mic. So it's just I'm coming on because unfortunately, our friends at the Rover, that's right, Chris Curtis and Nora Loreto, are actually doing kind of a live event at the Saloon Bistro in the Village in East Montreal. So they're like on stage, and so our roving correspondents couldn't actually speak with them. So sadly, instead, I'm just going to come and kind of wrap up with you this evening for our last few minutes. And if people want to go see Nora Loreto, Chris Curtis, and some other superstars live, go to Saloon Bistro at 1333 St. Catherine Est here in Montreal. How are we feeling about this election after a couple hours of streaming?
Depressed. Just I feel like the word would be depressed. Not surprised, but depressed that I'm not surprised.
Well, it was great to get some context from Taylor C. Noakes talking about the history and stuff like that. it was really interesting to hear from Sam Harper what we can anticipate with some of the healthcare disaster that we're looking forward to seeing from the CAC government. But I think, and Gab was kind of touching on this before. I mean, lots of people were touching on it. Alexis was sort of talking about it a bit with like some disappointment with Quebec Solidar and stuff. But it's sort of an election where we just see like the Petit Quebec, like a sort of mentality that is like, I don't know, like to support the CAC is to be proud of being a Quebecer, but not confident. And so it's a bummer for me because like I got French background. My family's, you know, partly from here. So it's like a bummer to see the CAC just like completely own, and the results are only partly in, leading or elected in 91 seats, 19 for the Liberals, 8 for Quebec Solidar at the moment, and a couple for the Parti Québécois.
Oh.
So it's just like, yeah, it sucks. Like there's no silver lining except the Conservative Party being handed their asses, which is extremely funny. Yeah, it's very funny to me. Is it funny to you?
Oh, it's hilarious. It's lovely to see, especially after a campaign with Eric, you know. It's like, that's exactly what we want to see is nothing.
Which riding do you live in? Do you live in Manon Massey's riding?
I am in Plateau Est, Plateau and de Lormy and Laurier. That's the corner I'm in.
Oh, so, it's what's her name? Our Pivot friends would know. I forget her name, but yeah, okay. So you have a Quebec Solidar representative.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Did you vote?
Yes, I did.
You can vote in Quebec, and I can vote in Quebec.
Yes.
We both voted.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. Good. No, and I actually thought that I wouldn't be able to, but luckily.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was your feeling when you stepped into the ballot box? And I mean, did you vote CAC?
Oh, CAC? No,
you didn't.
Of course not. Quebec Solidar.
Yeah. Oh, you did. Me too.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So what was your feeling when you walked in and you submitted that ballot for QS?
I feel like this time, like because basically what happened was when I first moved here in 2018, I wasn't able to vote. So that felt very like hopeless, just, you know, having read a bit about the CAC at the time and having read about Quebec Solidar. So I feel like this time around being able to vote as an Anglophone Ontarian who's now lived here for 4 years, it made me actually finally feel part of the province. You know, I think it was like I felt like I experienced kind of the ripple effects of a CAC government before, without even having the chance to, you know, vote against. But this time around, it felt very empowering to be able to do at least, you know, my part in a way, even if the outcome was still what it was.
It's such a token thing to vote, and I know it sucks ass, like it's stupid, whatever. But like, no, just that action, that process, like knowing your contribution, like did it matter? No. But I guess living in our ridings, our circonscriptions, where we can guaranteed predict that it's going to be a landslide win. For our candidate, I guess I take comfort in that, just like sort of living in that stretch of Montreal where we just sort of have a very orange lifestyle.
Even if it's a bubble, I think that's the only thing. It's like you sometimes, you know, when you get these kind of outcomes and you know, read these kind of headlines, you realize how much of a like leftist, you know, radical socialist or whatever, you know, bubble that you're in, and you see kind of the reality as well of what is outside of Montreal, what is, you know, outside of Quebec and beyond, right? Like the fact that we don't even have something as left-leaning as Quebec Solidar in Ontario is like a whole other story.
You haven't heard of the Ontario NDP? Oh, they rock. Have you heard of Andrea Horvath? No?
Oh, she's so cool, right?
She's a radical that I've been following for a long time.
Yeah,
sorry,
totally
we don't want to get off the Quebec topic. But I guess one other thing that I can take away from this evening with being kind of fun is that it was really cool that we got to put on this sort of event and had some people hopefully enjoying it and learning some things. CUTV is a space where we like to try to make those things happen. And my role is just broadcast coordinator, so it's very ad hoc, but I'm really happy that we could put this together tonight, and it was just like wonderful to get to share it with our friends from Pivot. We're very sad that Nora Loreto and Chris Curtis from the Rover can't join us, but we are hopefully going to go drink with them at the bar presently. And Maya, thank you for hosting this. It was like really cool and just like really fun to get to do. So I feel really happy.
Yeah,
How about
this
you?
was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I don't feel happy about the election
no.
results. I'm still depressed about
Yeah.
that. But yes, of course, this was a great stream. Thank you so much. Super interesting to speak with Alexis, Gabrielle, Una. Just getting those different pockets of perspective is like super insightful for me. Just to build a better kind of perspective for myself living in Quebec these past few years. I feel very grateful to be here.
Do you want to read your wrap up?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So wrap up, we've got and that's our program for tonight. This Quebec 2022 election live stream has been a co-presentation of CUTV and the Solidarity Journalism Cooperative Pivot. Look for more vigorously researched news, analysis, opinions, podcasts, and videos from their team of incredible investigative journalists at Pivot, Quebec. Community University Television serves Concordia students and the surrounding community and is a hub for independent media production and growing media institutions in Montreal and Quebec, with initiatives including our Grassroots Coverage Fund and bi-weekly news video show Local 514. Find out more about the work that we do and get involved at cutvmontreal.org. We hope tonight the broadcast has been presented the kind of observations and analysis you won't find elsewhere in mainstream corporate media. Thanks to the Rovers' Chris Curtis, to author Nora Loreto, to journalist Taylor C. Noakes, to Pivot's Sam Harper, Coralie Beaumont, Una Barré, Alexis Rose, and Gabrielle Brossard-Lecourt, and to CUTV's Clément Lechat. And thanks to CUTV's dynamic production team, including station manager Sofia Barsowski, executive director Drew Oja J, and audiovisual genius Fan Jiang, and to executive producer / showrunner Andre Goulet. You can find more of my work on TikTok at The Breach Media and at Batik Boutique. That's my clothing brand. Actually, it's called Batik Boutique. I've been your host today, Maya Amoah. Thank you for joining us.
Awesome.